Hi everyone, my name is Krystal Figueroa, and in today's video I'm going to show you how I like to start off my portraits by creating a simple sketch using just a few shapes and very simple lines to map out my portrait. And the reason why I like to start off this way is it helps me to focus on the major components of the face and to not focus so much on the details. When you have a tendency to focus on the details first, that can create a few problems. The first problem is that oftentimes, I know in my own experience, that when I start with the smaller features and details, when I start to create, to work outward, I notice that my proportions and positioning of certain features will sometimes be off or disproportionate. Another issue I tend to find too is I notice that when I focus on the details initially, that slows down my process quite a bit, and it can often lead to burnout. So whether I end up just keeping a simple line and shape portrait or drawing, or I go in there and create more details, which I do usually end up doing, I can at least feel happy that I created a complete work of art. Okay, so this is the inspiration photo that I chose for this particular tip, and I really like using this. I really like this photo for a few reasons. The first reason is the shapes in this picture, in this portrait, are quite simple and they're pretty distinct, so it'll be easy to find them and map them out, and you don't have a lot of really involved detail in this particular photo that's going to create a challenge. I like photos like this for when I don't really want to focus too much on the drawing aspect and I want to just focus on the coloring, because then I can do my drawing really fast and then get to the fun part, which for me is coloring. But for this particular tip, I think that this is a really good place to start, whether you, again, like I mentioned, just need a break from the drawing, or you are still learning how to draw a face. It's always nice to start off with the bigger picture and then graduate to working with the details. Another reason why I like working with this technique is that it will help you to focus on what's important, which is creating the overall composition of your portrait, and to also not be so hung up on creating what you might think would be a perfect face. I tend to work more with an illustrative style, so that's another reason why I like it. I'm not trying so much to create a realistic portrait as much as I am just trying to create something that does look like a face and does express the emotion of the subject, but isn't necessarily a direct copy of what I'm looking at in the photo. And that's also going to define what will eventually become your personal style. As you can see, I already mapped out the shapes here on my paper, but I'm going to show you how I actually found those shapes. So if you happen to have an iPad, this does make this part of the process, this initial part, very easy. But if you don't have a fancy iPad, you can definitely still do this technique. For beginners, what I like to do, or when I start off, or frankly if I just want to not think too hard about where my shapes are going to lay, I like to use the actual photo as a guide. So if you don't have an iPad or some kind of digital device to trace out your shapes, you can actually print out the photo and draw right on top with either a Sharpie or some, brighter color. Like you could print it out black and white even. I actually recommend that, so you don't focus so much on the color. You're just focusing on the shapes. And then another thing you can also do is take tracing paper on top and do that. So I'm going to show you real quick. I actually used the Procreate app to map out my shapes. So as you can see here, I actually chose two different colors. I did my larger major shapes and lines in blue, and then my medium shapes, features in red. I tried to not do too many shapes and lines because it does at some point make it difficult to find the placement or where your shapes start and end. So, and another thing too is, again, I'm going to end up erasing all of these lines, my pencil lines, once I'm ready to, once I've already added the ink to my paper. So it really doesn't matter so much if I do the details, because in the end I'm going to end up erasing it or redrawing it. And frankly, it's just a waste of time. And my hope here is that when you try out this technique, that you are just going to allow yourself to get lost in the process, focus on the moment, and not try to predict or control necessarily where this portrait is going to go. Okay, so just to give you an idea of how I did this. So I actually started off with the circle shape here for the top of the head, keeping in mind that the skull actually does not start at the top of the hair, because this gentleman has a rather high hairstyle here, and his skull definitely does not reach out that high. A really easy way for you to find the top of the skull is to start drawing your line of the circle shape at the forehead, and draw a line at the back of the head, and then just trace it for the top of your circle, and then just find your way. It doesn't really matter where it lays necessarily on the inside of the face. I just care more about where the top is. And then the second shape I did actually, just because honestly this hair is just a fun shape to draw, I created a sort of oval oblong shape on top. And allow your shapes to overlap, because that's actually going to help you find your shapes when it comes time to draw them on your paper. For the bottom of the face, I created a sort of rounded triangle, a triangle here with, you know, rounded corners to find the chin, the jawline, and the front of the face here. This shape really works well when you're creating profile or three-quarter orientation portraits, orientated portraits. Okay. The next shape I did was the circle, I'm sorry, the square or the rectangle here for the neck, and I have it overlap. It's going to make it easier for me to find it since I have it touching the circle here that I started off with. So I just traced the back of the neck, and then the front of the neck here, and then just squared it off. I could even do a triangle down here if I really wanted to just create the bottom or the top of that collar there. Okay, and then my simple big line here is just the top of his shoulder, and I just had that come across, and as you can see I have it touching the bottom of that triangle. Once I laid out my big shapes, just so I could find the features more easily, I picked a different color for my medium and smaller shapes, and I went ahead and added those right on top. So I have the oval for the ear, the triangle for the nose, a smaller triangle for his right eye, and an even smaller one here for the left eye, which is almost disappearing on the other side of his face there. And the last smaller detail that I added here, or line I should say, is just for the mouth, just so I know where it falls in relation to the nose and the chin. Okay, so once you have that basic map, what you can then do is on your pencil or on your paper, working with the pencil, make sure you work lightly. You don't want to push hard into the paper. So a really easy way to do that is to keep your arm moving loose. And again, I move at at my elbow and I move my arm. I don't move my wrist and I don't rest my hand on the paper. That way I can keep it fluid and light. The minute you push down into your paper, you will not be able to, or you will have difficulty in removing and lifting those lines off of your paper when it once you add the ink. And I don't really want to have all those overlapping lines at the end of this. So again, work lightly and softly and keep it loose. It's okay if you have a few lines if you need to just feel the shape out. I want to exaggerate the top of his hair a little bit, so I'm actually going to even add a little bit more of a line towards the top of that oval shape there. Okay, so just again following my guide, and you can make note of where the shapes overlay with one another and place those. And again, you don't have to worry about it being exact. When it comes time to lay the ink down, you have the opportunity to redefine your shapes, adjust your lines however you need to. And you can certainly do that during the pencil sketch, but I try not to spend too much time doing that because then you will, again, get bogged down in the initial part of the process and you don't really get to enjoy as much of the ink portion, I feel like. Now, if you don't absolutely feel comfortable with taking the risk of just laying down the ink because it is a commitment, you can certainly go ahead and start drawing out your lines with pencil. Giving a little more pressure with the pencil. But again, I try not to do that unless I really feel comfortable with the line I'm creating. I'm actually going to switch back over to the photo here. So that's another thing too. Once you lay down your shapes, you can remove your little shape map there and just look at the photo. So again, I'm going to draw slightly heavier lines with my pencil, but I'm not going to go into any detail work. This is just going to help me figure out where I want my lines to start going. And sometimes if I want to figure out whether or not my line is going in the right direction or at the right angle, I will actually just hover over the photo and get the feel of what that angle and that line is like, and then I'll go back and just loosely create that same motion over my paper with the pencil. So again, showing this technique doing that, I'm going to go ahead and do that. Back of the head, top of the hair, back of the neck. And I might actually do a pencil line of the eyebrow, or at least the very bottom of it, so I can make sure that it's where I want it to be. And maybe the bottom of the lip and the nostril. Okay, now as you can see, if I wanted to stop here, I have a pretty fun little pencil illustration and I can feel accomplished and I could leave it here. But if anyone knows how I am, I do like to work with my ink and get pretty detailed at some point, so this is not where I end here. But I will stop with the pencil because this is an opportunity to again make a commitment and have fun with the inks and see where the line takes you. Now, the beauty of the pencil is, again, you can erase it. So if I decide that a line I drew in pencil is not where I want it to be, that's okay. Like for example, I drew this line way out here. Now, I do like how exaggerated it is, but maybe I want to pull it back a little bit. So what I'll do is I'm just going to draw a new line. And I try to work with broad strokes. If you do need to take a few breaks and lift your pen, that's okay. Oh, another thing too is I like to start with a thicker marker if I want to create my basic lines in and shapes initially, just to, you know, give me some kind of structure. And then I'll go back in with a more fine ink pen. I really like my brush tip pen also to create those detailed and very organic lines. Sometimes I'll do a whole portrait with this brush pen, to be honest, but for the purposes of this video, I think it would be really fun to, again, create something really clean and distinct here. So we're gonna work with our Faber-Castell artist pen here, and I have it in the B, so I get a nice bold line here. So as you can see here, I had placed where I thought I wanted the nostril with the pencil, but I realized I actually wanted to take it a little bit lower and a little bit farther out. So I went ahead and did that with my ink marker, or my ink pen here. And again, when it comes to the hair, I'm trying to keep this fairly simple. So I'm not really going to draw every single hair. I'm just going to focus on creating the movement of the hair, just giving myself a few directional lines to show which way those hairs are going. I'm going to go ahead and move on to using my brush tip pen here. And I love this because I can create broader strokes if I want to, or I can go in and create the fine details with the very tip of the brush. Great for eyelashes, by the way, if you need a good pen for that. Really great for facial hair. So I'm going to go ahead and lay that down. The beauty of the brush tip pen too is that no two lines are going to be the same, and so it definitely gives it more of a natural and organic feel to your lines. And it's really great for creating some facial features, like the wrinkles in his forehead. I don't necessarily want to do that with a thick line. I want to create it because it is part of his face, but I don't necessarily want to draw attention to that because it's not a major detail. And then what I will do now is just lay down some of the bolder shadows just to create some dimension in his hair. and you can see there's a lot more of that towards the hairline. And I don't want to put too much because I want to keep the highlights that are in the hair. Now, I cut off too much of the top of his head, so I'm okay with adding a little more volume at the top, and you won't even be able to tell because I'm going to turn that into a shadow. So this is what I'm talking about, just committing to whatever you create. You go in there with a plan, and you just expect that it's going to change and evolve, and that's okay. And again, this is what I'm talking about in terms of not being so committed to your initial sketch. Because in the end, you're going to notice things that you didn't notice the first time around. And this is a great opportunity for you to redefine what you were initially working with using your ink. So if I wanted to bring the chin further down, bring that beard a little bit, give it a little more fullness, I can go ahead and do that with the ink, and you would be none the wiser. And there you have it. So at some point you can decide this is where I'll stop. I could keep going, but I'm actually really happy with where I'm at right now. And if I wanted to go in later and add color to it, I can certainly do that. And I have a good starting point here with my ink and pencil. Once your ink is fully dry, make sure it is. If you're not completely sure, you can hold it towards the light and rotate it and flip it and see if there is a bit of a sheen. You can go over it with very lightly with a paper towel just to absorb any lasting ink. But do make sure before you go ahead and erase your pencil lines that the ink is completely dry. So I will go ahead and finish up my portrait, and we'll leave it at that. I hope you found today's tip helpful, and again, make sure that you have fun with the process and allow yourself some freedom and give yourself permission to take some risks when it comes to creating your drawings.